Welcome back to the Clinical Athlete Podcast. If you're not familiar with Clinical Athlete, we're a network of healthcare providers, students, and coaches who specialize in the management of athletes. You can find your nearest Clinical Athlete provider at clinicalathlete.com. We also have the Clinical Athlete Forum, where we discuss and share ideas and resources related to athlete health and performance. To join the forum or for a potential listing on the Clinical Athlete Directory and for all upcoming seminars, webinars, and events, details can be found on the website. We've got weightlifting certifications coming up, so check it out. This podcast can also be found on our website along with YouTube, iTunes, Google Play, Spotify, Stitcher, and iHeartRadio. If the platform that you use allows you to rate the show, we'd appreciate you taking the time to do that so that we can get this information out to as many people as possible. My name is Quinn Hennick. I'm a doctor of physical therapy in Orange County, California at Clinical Athlete Newport. On this show, we are joined by co-host Jared Maynard, who is the Clinical Athlete Continuing Education Director and Coordinator and a physiotherapist at Depth Physiotherapy in Waterloo, Ontario, Canada. He is also a strength coach and runs an online powerlifting coaching company and is a competitive powerlifter himself. And we have our other co-host, John Flagg, who is an athletic trainer and the powerlifting, weightlifting, and strongman coach at 301 Strong in White Plains, Maryland, and the owner of Rebuild Stronger, an online coaching platform for strength athletes. John is also a clinical athlete provider and the lead instructor of the Clinical Athlete Powerlifting Certification. And one quick announcement, we have recently launched the Clinical Athlete Coaching Program, in which myself, John, and Jared are head coaches. So if you're an athlete or know of any athletes in need of coaching to be able to get back to or surpass their previous performance goals, head over to clinicalathlete.com for details. And for the most important announcement, on this show, we welcome Ellie Somers. Ellie is a doctor of physical therapy and the owner and head SheWolf for Sisu Sports Performance and PT in Seattle, Washington, where she works to foster female athlete development before, during, and after injury. On this episode, we talk with Ellie about those very things, how to get female athletes comfortable with lifting, special considerations when managing the rehab or training of the female athlete, and a lot more. Enjoy the show. Welcome back to the Clinical Athlete Podcast. We got Jared and John as always. Jared, what's up?
Not much, man. How are you?
Oh, I'm just living the dream.
Attaboy. West Coast living?
Uh-huh. I was in Wisconsin this past weekend for a course, and it was fall there, and it's cold. Well, like a little. You can feel the difference. It's like a different kind of cold up there.
And you survived?
Well, almost survived. I'm actually dead.
It snowed in Montana today.
Really?
Yeah. I'm not in Montana, but I have friends in Montana, and it snowed, and I'm jealous.
Wow. Montana's beautiful, though.
It is.
John, how you doing?
I'm doing great. I had an awesome day. Looking forward to this conversation.
What'd you do today?
I coached a ton of women.
Oh, serious?
Which is appropriate for our conversation. And I squatted 815, so I'm really happy.
Damn.
Briefs or what?
Straps down.
Wait,
Straps down.
why are you assuming?
Huh? Just because that's a lot of weight.
What? Maybe it's
he trains equipped, man. I know that.
Okay.
And I swear people that can do that without some sort of equipment are freaks of nature. It's a terrifying experience.
So we also have Dr. Ellie Somers, who is a physical therapist, is going to school us on training and rehab for the female athlete. Ellie, how are you?
I'm doing great. It's great to be here. Thanks for having me.
Thanks so much for being on.
Yeah.
So Ellie is going to be doing a webinar for us very soon about rehab for the female athlete. And we thought we'd get her on and start talking about some of the points that she's going to hit on in the webinar, because it's a big topic. And before we do that, though, can you talk a little bit about your background and what's kind of led you to your current interests and everything that you're doing, and to the pinnacle of your professional career now, talking to our 6 listeners of the Clinical Athlete Podcast?
Yeah. This is the peak. There's nowhere to go but down.
You should have waited longer. Yeah.
I know. Gosh, where do we even start? Well, I've been a physical therapist for about 11 years. And maybe a few years ago, three or 4 years ago, I paid off my student loans and realized that I had a little bit of financial freedom, and it gave me a boost to start my own practice. And so I started my own practice sort of on a whim, admittedly, not a great plan in place, not a lot of thought in place. I just knew I wanted to be doing something different. And then in starting that, I worked a lot with women and really enjoyed it, and realized I think how much we miss when we work, how much we miss or need to be doing differently when we work with male clients versus female clients. And that was really highlighted when I saw a client who was early on in starting my practice, because I had been working in peds before that. I saw a client as an adult who had been in back pain for years and years, and been told a lot of really scary and harmful things about her body that made her really terrified to move in any direction. And that was kind of a turning point for me in seeing how language can impact how a woman feels in her body and how she feels in pain. And lo and behold, a few years later, now I'm like really specialized and work with women. So, yeah.
When you have a lot of programs and things going as well, you've got a kind of an endurance-based deal going. Can you talk a little bit about what you're doing with that?
Yeah. So I realized that I was pretty good at working with runners. And so I started to niche down a little bit, maybe like a few months ago. I've always worked with runners and started coaching them a few years ago, but it was kind of like on the side. It wasn't a really big primary focus, and then started becoming more of a focus as people referred, and you start building a little bit of a reputation. And so now I help women really in their transition from injury back to performance. And then, if they want to keep working with me towards those performance goals, I'm working with them during that as well. So that's like, I would say that's a good portion of my business now, is coaching runners, back to performance running, and coaching runners how to lift weights.
Cool.
Yeah.
In regards to your training personally, is that kind of where you are right now as well? Lifting to augment some of your endurance-based things?
It's funny. Yes and no. I exercise now for the pure love of exercise. And I'm kind of learning how to weight lift a little bit better these days. I originally sort of, I don't want to say trained as a power lifter, but kind of trained as a power lifter, and then transitioned into weightlifting earlier this year, and just started really enjoying it. The running has always just been something that I like to do. I've never been a competitive runner. I've actually played Division I soccer in college, and so soccer was always my jam. And now as an adult, it's just a great way for me to feel good about myself. Yeah.
Weightlifting is way more fun than powerlifting, though. You can just admit it.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, 100%. I am turned. It's a lot more fun. It actually reminds me of sport,
Yeah, you had to be an athlete to be a weightlifter.
Yeah.
Oh, shit.
Oh, man.
There it is.
Oh, we're best friends already.
Yeah, this is great.
There's a lot of skills and drills, and when you're going for something big, you get a little bit nervous. And I guess I got that with powerlifting too, but maybe not quite as much. It's just a different feel. I don't know.
It's okay. No. We can just talk about this the rest of the show, is how much better weightlifting is than powerlifting. But no, I think that's a good,
broaden your horizons.
No, she did. She came back. Oh, me. I did too.
Yeah,
I'm a national champion powerlifter, my friend. I have a trophy from 2010. Yeah.
Throw that in my face. Huh?
Yeah. Just brag about it a little more. Whatever.
It's okay. It was a federation that nobody's heard of. So I say it very NASA, NASA. You look it up. It's real.
Oh.
Look it up.
Not the space agency.
Yeah.
Nope. Even better.
Fake news.
I think that's a good segue, though, to what we're going to talk about with female athletes and lifting weights, or just female patients in general. You know, I say athlete is somebody who's trying to get back to something physical, or maybe you're, as a clinician, using physical activity as your intervention. So the principles are the same, but what are some of the barriers, or those initial barriers that you see on a consistent basis in regards to getting some of your female clients, female patients to resistance train, that type of thing?
Yeah, I think the most obvious barrier is a fear of load, and really a lack of understanding of how much to load when we're talking about weightlifting or just lifting weights in general. And for women, a lot of the women that I work with, they just have never, ever done it. And, you know, if you've been exposed to weightlifting for a period of time, you start to learn, you know, what heavy is. And to have so many women just never be exposed to it, I think is like the biggest issue. And there's no better place to capture these people than when they've gone through rehab, in my opinion, or when they start rehab. Because it's a great opportunity to teach them those principles under, you know, good, highly educated individuals. So that's what I would say about that.
Do you find that they're coming in with some consistent misnomers? Because it's a learned thing to be a little bit reticent from that stuff, right?
Yeah. I think a lot of women come in with the idea that load is going to make them big or look like a man. And I guess I don't really get into too many conversations with people about that, except to introduce them to load in the first place. And I think once I'm able to introduce them to load in a way that they feel safe and empowered, that sort of subtle undertoned conditioning, I think, starts to fade to the background a little bit. And then it becomes more about like, oh, am I doing this right? There's a lot of fear about, you know, if their movement quality is good enough. I think a lot of women are a lot of the women I see, I should say, are type A personalities. So they want to be perfecting the movement early on. And that's a barrier too, because, you know, it's not going to be perfect initially. And if you want to be loading appropriately, sometimes it's not going to look pretty, and that's okay. And so you get sort of these nuanced experiences that influence somebody's willingness to go back to it and to experiment with it and be aggressive with it.
Do you have some specific strategies that you go towards? So education is a piece of this, I would assume, and it's, you know, you're implementing education throughout the process. But in regards to how you actually get them into an entry point for loading, you know, it's not, just go pick up that barbell. Just go deadlift. You know, how do you kind of nudge that?
Yeah,
a little bit.
I would say it actually is kind of like that. Okay. I try to approach those early stages without any, barriers to their movement, right? To say like, I don't want a woman to come in and see me who's having back pain and for me to be like scaring the shit out of deadlifts, you know, like scaring them so much that they don't want to deadlift. And so usually it's an exploratory process, and I'll put weight in front of them and be like, you know, try this. Without like a lot of instruction or barriers, I'll maybe demonstrate the movement first. If they're really nervous about it, you know, we'll start light. But usually it's forcing them to test the waters with it, because I find that most of the time they surprise themselves. Yeah.
Sorry. The endurance athletes, is there a barrier? Is there kind of a double barrier there between the endurance female athletes, where they don't want to get bulky, number one, because it would slow them down, and then number two, it's like what you said, that kind of like cultural misrepresentation, or that misunderstanding of the physiology behind lifting weights. But do you find that to sometimes be doubly difficult in that population specifically?
Yeah. Not all women that I work with are ready for it. And that's like a slow burn type of thing for me, because most of them, like I said earlier, they don't know how to do it. And they've never like pushed up to, an 8 or a 9 or a 10. Like they've never tested those levels. And for runners, we don't really need to be testing 1 rep max to be making big changes, but we do need to have a good idea of where that like 70% is. And if they don't know what that feels like, more often than not, they're way underloading and doing, the classic like high repetition, low load type of exercises. And I'm trying to help runners conceptualize like, actually, it'd be great if we can do, a 30-minute workout is relative strength workout where you're doing heavy deadlifts, trap bar deadlift, a couple of drills and a couple other strength exercises. And it shouldn't take you an eternity to get this shit done, but you have to be loading enough in order to achieve those results. And so many women just don't know what that feels like. And so I don't force it. I don't force them to go heavier than what they're comfortable with. I think most of the time they need a coach or a physio. I consider my job as a physio or physical therapist a coach nowadays anyway, to work them through that and sort of nudge them along in a controlled fashion, but in a way that like pushes them to the point where maybe their form does start to break down. And then they can be like, holy shit, I just deadlifted, 130 pounds when before I had no clue what I was doing.
I wanted to take it back to the language piece and kind of stick on deadlifts there, because I think I find myself taking a similar tack as what you described in terms of just not even giving them much of a spiel, or sometimes not even calling it a deadlift. Because sometimes I'll ask them, or if I ask, hey, have you ever deadlifted before? They're like, no, I don't think I have. It's like, you ever see this sort of movement? They're like, oh yeah, no, I can't do that. So sometimes it just seems to go over smoother if I just put a weight in front of them, maybe even on a block, and just say, just pick that up. And just, what do you mean? Just pick it up however you want to, and we'll go from there. Just really try to lower that barrier to entry.
Exactly. And I think so often, like I had said, they surprise themselves. And the same is true with injury. I was thinking about it today during my workout this morning. I'm doing squats and having a little niggle in my hip. And most people are conditioned to think you have pain, like you got to deload a little bit. And I'm like the opposite, And so I added weight and lo and behold, it went away. And I think like, I don't need to get into the nuances of pain on that issue, but it's really a moment where you can be like, you're resilient and this isn't going to be like, it's not going to be the death of you to try and lift this weight. Let's just start there. Yeah. Love it.
So I want to kind of dive into this a little bit more, because I want to get a little bit into the root of why the surprise and fear is there. I run into this a lot because majority of the women on my team that I coach in powerlifting run into the same thing. That's a 9, but it looks like a 7. And then you have them do an AMRAP and they do 15 reps instead of the 3. Where do you think a lot of this fear and I don't even want to call it apprehension comes from in regards to the language? And I'd probably say inequity of language given to women, especially in a healthcare and athletic environment. It seems to me as though there's still this prevalent message of frailty.
Yeah.
That is spread. What's your take on that?
I mean, fragility narratives are like, I'm trying to break those down every day. Like women are told so often that their bodies are messed up in some way, anyway. And that doesn't make people feel good about themselves in any environment. And when you add like this cultural strength and conditioning realm, women haven't been exposed to that at all and have been sort of conditioned to think it's not their space to be in. I like to think like social media is changing that game a little bit, and younger athletes are being introduced to these things. But fragility narratives are just pervasive. And, I get clients who are like, my sister told me that my back is all fucked up. And it's like, what? What does your sister know about this? Or who have friends who are like trainers and giving them advice that, sort of keeps them wrapped up into it. And then there's the whole like Q angle and wide hip thing that women experience as well. This message that, our wide hips are the reason why we have knee pain, why we have hip pain, why we have back pain. And these narratives, they stick with people, and especially when they've experienced injury or had a painful circumstance in any of these environments, it's like their reason for why they experience pain is because my body's messed up. It's not shaped right. I'm pronated in my feet. My knees buckle. When I was a child, my doctor told me that my hips face a weird way. And you couple that with then an inherent bias to not load female athletes enough. And, it's a perfect recipe for just feeling fragile.
How deep do you go into the physiology of, if you get I don't want to build muscle mass, I don't want to get too bulky. I mean, do you debunk that with just straight anatomy and science behind that? Because I know that, I've heard that too, but I have colleagues that hear that all the time, and they're always kind of searching for that elevator pitch.
Yeah, I usually keep it as simple as possible and say it takes really specific training and really specific nutrition to do that. You're not going to get big. And that's tended to work most of the time, but you still get, so I do the coaching that I'm doing in strength is online and it's all virtual. And, I get some in-person clients through that too, but the virtual side of things is interesting because you'll program something for somebody and then they do something totally different with less weight. And you're like, what are you doing? You're missing the whole point here. And you can just see where these sort of subtle self-regulating behaviors impact their loading on their own. So, I do the best that I can, but everybody's coming to the table with extensive bias about that. And I think that most people tend to respond with, okay, I'm going to trust this process. And you just got to keep gently nudging them because it's not a fucking race. So just slow it down.
Mark it down. She's the reason we're getting a mature rating on this one.
Yeah, sorry.
No, it's fine. I mean, I think we have one already, don't we? Sometimes maybe, we do, sometimes we don't.
Jared normally says enough sorries that it erases it.
Yeah. Kept this on good terms. I can't do it here.
We have a Canadian, so that takes it away. Yeah, for sure. But and it's funny because I wish it was like that. I don't want to get bulky as a guy. Like as if putting on muscle as a male was that easy. I wish it was that easy. Yeah. If I just look at a weight and I'm like, oh yeah, I'm gonna look like the guys at the Arnold. It doesn't work like that. It's hard for anybody to truly build muscle. So I think that right there is like, we're gonna lift in a way that strength doesn't equal muscle mass necessarily. You can get stronger without packing on a bunch of hypertrophy, and that's for anybody, not just female.
And I usually break it down. Sometimes I'll do like a little visual, just like a strength and conditioning pyramid or whatever. So they can kind of see like what I'm talking about. And none of that includes the words hypertrophy. I don't include it in there. And so, I think that word scares people. And I'm like, they just have a misunderstanding of what it actually means. And so simplifying it seems to work pretty well for most women. And I'm fortunate enough, women come to me because they trust me. They've been given my name by somebody or seen something that I've done. And so now I'm getting people who I hate to say, like, I'm not fighting against them. They're ready to work with me as part of their team. So
it's a good place to be.
Fortunate that way. Yeah, it is a good place to be.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, it also means that it's the message is being spread.
Yeah, I hope so.
The idea of energy availability in the female athlete, you had actually sent us over a consensus statement on relative energy deficiency in sport, and that was a 2018 consensus statement. It's actually open access.
Yeah.
Can you go into RED a little bit? Because I'm not super familiar with it.
Yeah.
So maybe even kind of break it down right from the beginning, what it is, how it can affect the female athlete, and we can kind of jump off from there.
Yeah, so RED is relative energy deficiency in sport. That's RED-S. And it's basically when the energy you take in doesn't match the energy you expend. And it can lead to a whole host of issues with your entire body. So like for women in particular, especially with endurance athletes, I think there's a cultural stigma around, body image and weight and race pace and being fast and what that means. And, that you need to lose weight to be fast and all of these things that influence how much energy they actually intake while they run or before they run or after they run, that impacts their energy availability. And it can lead to musculoskeletal injury. It can lead to gastrointestinal distress, cardiovascular issues, psychological issues. Basically, any system of your body can get messed up because of this.
Are you seeing this in some of the populations that you're working with or have worked with?
100%. Yeah. That's a pretty decent portion. I think honestly, most women have some of this. And I have, I'm trying to find the best ways to educate women because it's a very personal experience. And I think that, it's not my job to say to somebody, you don't need to lose weight, but it is my job to keep them healthy and keep them from having injuries. And so there's like this very sensitive discussion that has to happen around how much food they're eating, what that means for their performance. Things like if they're having an intolerance to the workload that I'm programming, that might be an indicator that they're not getting enough fuel to be able to perform. It's nuanced and it's difficult. Things like having conversations about their menstrual cycle. I use now the Fitter Woman app. It's an app that tracks my athletes' menstrual cycles and their symptoms of their menstrual cycle to adjust some of their programming. It has also helped me explain some of why they feel like crap one week and maybe feel better another week. So lots of considerations when it comes to RED-S. They use the term RED-S now because it also is a term that encompasses men, whereas before it was like the female athlete triad. Now we know that any athlete can have these issues, and RED-S is a much better umbrella to encompass those issues. And I will say I'm not like the best person to talk about RED-S, but I'm familiar with the signs and symptoms, and I know that food matters, and women are just, pretty much all of us have some form of eating dysfunction. Yeah, whether that's a disorder or not, it's definitely common that we'll have something that we're struggling with our bodies.
The next question I was going to ask is, it doesn't seem like this is something that would be, it's not specific to women, and you touched on that there. Now it kind of makes sense where it's more of an umbrella term, but anybody can have something like this or experience signs and symptoms of this, but perhaps it is that some of the prior beliefs, the cultural stuff that you're talking about that maybe shifts that needle towards the female population a little bit more. Yeah,
absolutely. I can't think of very many women that I know that are like, oh, I love my body. I love everything about it. Like, I just can't, and maybe I know men are the same way too, and they have similar tendencies, but it's just, we know it's more common in women. And we know that especially women in sport are more likely to have eating disorders or body image issues and things of that nature. It's not talked about in a very healthy manner either. I think so often we're like, you need to be eating the right things and just get all your greens. And it's like, well, wait a second. I could eat salads all day and I'm still not fueling for what I need to be doing when I'm out there running. Carbs, like the whole like low carb diet. Everybody wants to be on a low carb diet now. And if you run, you can't be on that diet if you want to be performing well and reducing your risk for injury. Like, you got to be consuming some form of carbohydrate regularly when you're talking about long distance running in particular. So yeah, I think, breaking down some of these conversations and making sure that women know, if you haven't had your period in a while, that's a bad thing. And that's a sign that you're deficient in energy. If you've got a history of bone stress injury, a low tolerance to your workloads, all of these things.
You talked about how sensitive of a conversation that is. It's a tough conversation, talking about chronic diet culture and breaking. We had a whole podcast on misinformation, and that is ingrained in our society of all the misinformation. Like you talked about salads. That's, I'll just have a salad, and I'll have salad again, and I'll have a salad again. It's like, okay, well, I'm glad your iceberg lettuce is fueling your 10-mile run. Good luck with that. And it's tough to break those walls down, and they can be really hard conversations.
Oh, for sure.
You have somebody come to you and tell you they're eating 700 calories a day. Yeah. And they don't understand why they're not losing weight and not performing. And it's a hard conversation.
Yeah. And it's, like I said, it's really sensitive, because I don't want to be the decider for somebody. And, part of what I'm going to talk about in the webinar is this concept of autonomy. It's not my role to dictate somebody's decision-making. And as a coach, though, my primary role is to make sure they stay healthy. That's what I care about. That's why people work with me. So if they're being, maybe not smart about some of their training or some of their fueling, I may not know about it until it's too late. But at that point, I need to have a conversation with myself and be like, is it a smart idea for me to be working with this person if they can't seem to get a hold of some of these concepts? Because, ultimately, I can't make those decisions for them. None of us can. And to me, it's really important that I honor my client's autonomy and choice. If they're coming off of a stress fracture and they want to start running, and I deem them in a good position to start doing that, I'm going to help them do that. I'm not going to hold them back simply because, they've got a history of stress fracture. Like, they have the choice to use their body however they want. And that's what I want to foster and help them understand at the same time, though, while making sure they stay healthy, which involves really difficult conversations sometimes. And maybe even letting go of athletes.
I was going to ask, have you had to do that?
I haven't yet, but maybe soon. I've got some right now. Yeah.
Shots fired.
Yeah.
If they're one of our 6 listeners, there's your wake-up call right there. I want to take a step back to something you said earlier about menstrual cycles and explaining the differences in how the female athlete's going to feel, or maybe even the way that you program. I want to ask you about that. Do you program around that? Because we actually had, so Greg Nuckols is doing some of his PhD studies on this kind of thing. We actually had him on the show and he talked a little bit about it, but I'd like to hear this from you and from your perspective. Is that something that you just have a conversation about, or do you sometimes program around that as well?
I do a little bit of both, because every person that I've worked with is different. I know that's like so cliche, but it's so true. And some women, they just respond so strongly during certain times of their cycle, and it makes it very difficult for them to train, which makes it difficult for them to feel like things are moving in the right direction. And I believe in auto-regulating workouts. And so part of what I try and coach my athletes to do is to make subtle adjustments. If, for example, they wake up and they're like really fatigued, it doesn't make sense to do a super hard workout that day. We can save it for another day when you feel better. Like, just get out, get some miles under your belt and take it easy, as long as there's good communication. And like I said before, I'm using that Fitter Woman app. The app is actually kind of expensive. And so I only use it with 3 athletes at a time. And I cycle them through to help them conceptualize how their cycle can influence how they feel and how it can influence their training. For example, one of my athletes just last week, she was in, according to the app, phase 4, which is like the premenstrual phase. It's when women feel the shittiest. We might be a little bit angry during those times. We might have difficulty sleeping during those times. And I hadn't specifically gone in and like adjusted her programming according to that phase, but because we had been using it, she knew that she could adjust some of the workouts and still be okay where we wanted her to be. Because now that she'll be past that this next week, we'll be able to push the needle a little bit more. So it's a way to like gauge, when is the right time to push to optimize somebody's performance in my eyes, and when is maybe the right time to pull the reins a little bit.
And that's interesting. That app is pretty cool. I've just done it verbally. I have an athlete that would be in phase 4, and she's like a PR monster at that time. Like, we can push pretty hard. Other athletes, you get the nausea and the bloating and the restlessness, and it's just where we got to scale back. So it is kind of an it depends answer, but it is an individual experience, very much so. I just think my biggest pet peeve with it is when people spread the narrative that it's some sort of like weakness, that it just drives me nuts. I've had female athletes come to me and they've expressed that coaches would not work with them because they are female because of that reason. That's why it's a pet peeve. That's why it makes me very angry. Yeah. But that's it. It is something you have to kind of track and look at.
Yeah, and I was having a good conversation with my friend Claire about this the other day.
Zai?
Yeah, do you guys know Claire Zai?
We were probably talking to her at the same time. About the same topic. Yeah,
because, it's like, she was like, do you ever worry that an athlete will, I forget the phrasing, like take it easy when they shouldn't. And I get a little bit weirded out by these conversations because I'm like, well, what's the goal of training? Like what's the point for anybody? If you're working towards maybe a PR or whatever, you're probably going to get that whether you mod that workout or not. And to me, it's all about optimization, right? Like finding the right times to optimize those training experiences, more than it is about like, I don't know, being soft with somebody and like letting them take it easy. At the same time, though, again, I so strongly believe in autonomy, and I'm not in the coaching business to like, make athletes be the best, most amazing athletes. I'm in it to improve their lives and help them improve their lives. And I view my role as a coach as like giving them a more robust understanding of what that means. And sure, we can work towards PRs, we can work towards big goals and probably reach those goals, but we don't need to have a linear approach in doing that. It doesn't really make any sense anyway. Like it's a way that our life periodizes for us as women,
Mm-hmm. Well, don't you think some of that comes down to education and training skill?
Yeah.
Like as they experience those situations, if they push themselves a little bit harder and they're successful, then they're probably more likely to do it again. You don't necessarily have to like put your foot on the gas and get after them. You can try to expose them to that experience through education. And if it increases their training skill over time, then they're probably more likely later on to figure that out better and be more autonomous.
100%. That's like, 100%. I so agree.
I think it sounds like obviously these principles are universal human principles, auto-regulation. Yeah. It's like what you mentioned, some of your athletes at that phase of their menstrual cycle may have a downtick in performance. They may, but then John gives the example of one of his athletes actually has an uptick. Yeah. So it's still dynamic and unpredictable, and male athletes have upticks and downticks as well. So I think it all comes to me. It sounds like it all circles back to you're not different because you're a female athlete, and that's a good thing. Now you have this other, you have this, now we're talking menstrual cycles. Obviously you've got that thing to manage, and maybe the probability of that affecting training is higher than if it weren't there. If you're a male athlete, and you're not dealing with that. Right. Yeah. So I'm not even going to pretend. But I think the message to me sounds just like treat yourself as if you are an athlete. It's not a female athlete, a male athlete, you're an athlete.
Yeah.
And yeah.
As an adult too, I think like, when I was young, none of this stuff mattered. You're just like, playing soccer, you're just doing exactly what you're told all the time. But now as adults, like we have a little bit more flexibility. And maybe if you're on an elite level, you do not have that flexibility. I think most people that I'm working with right now they have that flexibility. And if we can use it to decrease their injury risk, to keep them in sport and activity longer and keep them healthy doing that and feeling like they have some semblance of, control is the wrong word because I feel like that, but maybe control is the right word. I don't know, some semblance of like control over these things. I think, again, that is a barrier to entry, right? Like we remove another barrier by empowering them to understand these things better and showing them that they can have choice in the matter. And it doesn't have to be like A plus B plus C. It can be a little bit more emergent.
What's been going through my head as we've been talking about this is just that the stories that we tell ourselves matter, and how it's just another way, I'm sure, just to say what you three have said. And what I think I would be impressing upon people that I'm working with and what I have is to try to not count themselves out prematurely based on something that they think is going to influence their performance. We've talked about this before. You can go into the gym and feel crappy and just, think that today's going to be a terrible performance or terrible session. And Quinn, your line, okay, just warm up, see how you feel, see how that goes. And I think that equipping people to sort of reiterate that to themselves in the moment, that to me is kind of one of the things that you're getting at there, Ellie, and allowing themselves to, if they realize that their premonition was correct, that today kind of feels shitty. All right, here are my options. I know how to handle this just because I'm capable and I've done this, and I'm all right. But then if they start surprising themselves and like, well, that moved pretty good, then they also have options and they know how to take it in that direction too.
Exactly. And that's just it. Like creating those options for them, and showing them that, you have the choice in this experience. Like you can go hard, you can get out there and kind of see and play it out. But if you're feeling like shit, it's okay to pull the reins a little bit, and with the menstrual cycle, there are certain times of the cycle where sleep won't be as good and things of that nature. And for this particular athlete, she was sleeping like crap. And we know that influences injury risk. So like, why do we need to have you on the gas during these times when you're struggling? Like we can pull the reins and make adjustments or like tailor your program back and like push the needle in other ways. So I think those creating options for people and giving them the opportunity to dictate how their path is going to go to a certain degree as a coach is really important to engaging them in the process and motivating them to keep doing it.
And I find the more they buy into that pattern and the more they see it play out, the more apt they are to trust it. It's hard to get over that initial barrier sometimes and that initial hump to get them to just kind of buy in and get through that. But then they start to see, the pattern is I always push, I always make it through, and there's light at the end of the tunnel, and we move forward. And then it doesn't become I'm never making progress. It becomes this is just part of the process. Right.
Exactly.
Ellie, this has been a great conversation. I think the webinars, I'm really excited to hear a little bit more of the nuance of some of these things too. Where can people find you and get in contact with you?
You can find me, best way is probably email. And my email is Ellie, ELLIE, at SisuSeattle.com. You can also find me on Instagram, Dr. Ellie Somers. And, I have a website and all of that jazz, SisuSeattle.com as well. So
Sisu Seattle is the endurance piece that you have, the endurance platform, right?
Yeah. I just started a Sisu official page. We'll see how long it lasts. It's hard to manage two accounts. And I'm like, a little bit like struggling with maintaining social media presence as I get busier. So we'll see.
Sisu is Finnish?
Yeah, Sisu is a Finnish term. It stands for hardiness and grit, the ability to overcome obstacles in the face of adversity. Yeah, it's a good term.
That's awesome.
And if anybody missed it, I implore them to go back into Nick Hanna's Instagram and find your stuff from there. The series you did was excellent.
I really appreciate hearing that because it didn't do that well.
I loved it. I thought it was really good. I'm horribly biased, though, because you speak to our audience. So
yeah. I quite enjoyed it. Nick is awesome. He was actually here in Seattle not that long ago. He's a cool guy. And
you can't judge the success on like the exposure on social media because it's the things that you work the hardest on that seem to just fall flat from the the reach standpoint, but it's out there now. And like if you continue to just put out quality content, it people see that as a pattern. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But
totally.
And from this, you're going to get 6 more likes on that campaign.
Whoa. Go back. Everybody go back and see
We've arrived.
Maybe if we're lucky, my mom's listening and you'll get 7.
Yes.
And if you look at her story now, you'll see her doing some sweet pause pulls at the knee. Pause at the knee, plus clean, plus power jerk. Those are weightlifting exercises, Jared.
Thanks for the clarification. I really was confused.
And first of all,
is that they call it sport?
It's a sport. It's an actual sport. So next summer in the Olympics, you'll be able to watch it. Yeah.
So they get kicked out.
But Ellie, on your Instagram story today, you were 2 pounds under your PR.
2 pounds under what I wanted to be doing for a complex, an overhead complex.
Okay, because it didn't look very hard. And so I wanted to ask you, who stops 2 pounds under where they want to be?
I know.
Okay.
I don't have,
It's autonomy, Quinn. Back off.
No.
I guess I could probably have done a 5 pound increase from there, but I was already like sort of pressing out the weight overhead.
All right. We'll get under it.
I know.
Okay.
I'm trying.
Well, thank you so much for being on. This was really great.
Yeah, I appreciate it. It was fun. Good chat.
Yeah, I think people are going to get a lot out of it. A lot of important messages. And
yeah, I think it's a good one.
And stay tuned. Are we going to call this Kickass Rehab for the female athlete?
I'm game.
Are you?
Yes.
100%.
I mean, we've already got...
You can change the name if you want to change the name. If it's
I like it. No, I like it.
It's my style.
Hashtag powerlifting sucks.
Yeah.
I mean, we've already got the mature tag on it on this episode now.
We're there.
Yeah. Thanks so much, Ellie. This was great.
No, thanks, guys. Yeah, it was great to connect.
We'll talk soon. John, Jared, thanks as always.
Of course.
Pleasure.